The only other working class character we meet in the play is Edna, and it's interesting to me that Edna and Eva are both incredibly short names, sharing so many letters, and perhaps Priestley is deliberately trying to suggest that all the working class are connected in this way, and they're connected in their suffering and treatment by the ruling class, here represented by the Birlings. So in this reading of the play, it's Edna who announces the inspector. So the working classes are bringing inspection against the upper classes. And this imagery is alluded to here when Priestley gives Birling these words, "Give us some more light." In other words, he's going to expose through lighting, through this metaphor, the truth about the Birlings. So the inspector uses Eva's death in order to shock these characters and perhaps get them to confess to their part. But look at the method of death. She swallowed a lot of strong disinfectant. Now this is very revealing symbolically. She's obviously trying to disinfect herself. In other words, she's looking back at the choices she's made, even if she was forced into those choices, and the things that she's done, and she sees herself as infected or dirty, and she's got to disinfect or clean herself. Very interesting when you consider the relationship that we'll find she's had with Eric and Gerald, and also her own view of it, the self-disgust that this has brought about. Right from the beginning, we can see that Priestley is trying to give working class people a voice through Eva. So she, in fact, had left a letter and a sort of diary. In other words, she wants to be heard, she wants her story to be told, and Priestley, if you like, has set this up in order to tell that story. She appears to have no friends and family. It's very curious who this letter is to, and Priestley leaves this dangling, as though it might be a letter to posterity, for history to remember her, which Priestley is trying to do through the play. Priestley is also keen to point out that these young women, the type who work in factories and can't necessarily hold down jobs because they're vulnerable, inevitably get into various kinds of trouble. And so this isn't their fault, according to the inspector here. It's the lives that they are forced to lead because richer people are making decisions for them. Priestley also has Birling point this out. Well, we've several hundred young women there at the factory, and they keep changing. In other words, the job isn't enough to keep them in sufficient funds, and therefore they have to keep looking for work, or they get sacked, or they get ill. They are intensely vulnerable. And Eva is like Eve. She represents every woman who works in these kinds of factories. There is always a view in any society that those who are not paid well and are poor remain treated this way because they're not well educated enough, they do not work hard enough, they do not deserve more. And Priestley wants to get rid of this idea quickly. In the capitalist system, he's saying, you can be a good worker, you can be ready for promotion as Eva was, and you can still get sacked, you can still lose your job because everything is arranged against you. You have no power, but your employer has all the power. He makes this point even more forcefully by getting Birling to describe Eva this way. So even in his own opinion, she is an excellent asset to his business, yet he's still going to fire her. On stage, we're invited to contrast the opulence of the dining room table and what all the guests are wearing to this idea that Eva and her colleagues would get a 12% rise in wages. Although this sounds like a massive rise in wages, another way of looking at this is the difference between what they're paid and what a living wage would be. We see on several occasions during the play that those on strike have no savings. In other words, they only get enough money to spend each week and each month, and they are 12% short. In other words, they are always struggling for money. And this is the Birling's fault. It's not the workers' fault. It's not Eva's fault. Eric points out that women like Eva can't better themselves because they can't get work somewhere else, because all the other capitalists, all the other rich people, are offering the same sorts of wages. In other words, once you're poor, you're really trapped. Even if you keep your job, it's not enough, and you can't find a way to get more.